Right guys, next one on American West. As you can see, I'm just using these from my booster, but let's just get them out there so you've got some content to look at and fall asleep to. Again, I apologise if I'm rushing through these. I'm just trying to get them all up by the exam. Let's start. Right, okay, so how did policy change? Well, it's the expansion. Remember, they're initially in the East, and there needs to be some cause that leads them to want to change government policy. So that's what we're going to look at. And it's this whole topic, the American West, is really the westward expansion. Right? Okay. Two good graphics here, 1834, 1848. We need to find out what's happening in between. You can see one country in 1834 suddenly shrinks in 1848. We're going to look at that in more detail and look at the position of Indian territory, okay, and that permanent Indian frontier. That's going to be significant here. Right, so we get the Indian Removal Act. That's where we start. So that's our first real government policy in 1830. This is where President Jackson basically signs the Indian Removal Act, which pressures 46,000 Indians living in the east of America to give up their lands for new lands in the west. So set it out in the Mississippi River. This leads to this graphic where you can see the yellow line on there. I'm not sure if you won't be able to see it, I doubt. No, maybe you will. Yeah. So yeah, if you can see my mouse clicker there shows you the permanent Indian frontier, separates the whites from the natives. Again, they were promised protection as well from white incursion. Then you get the Trade and Intercourse Act. So this basically sets up the permanent Indian frontier, okay? This establishes it. It sets forts along the line, and it sets military patrols as well. Yeah, and again, it keeps them apart. It also bans trade of guns and alcohol between the two. Okay, so that's our next important act. Make sure you make notes of it. Okay, and then for me, a really significant one is the US gained territory after their war with Mexico. Sound good? Okay, so in 1845, Texas becomes part of the US, and in 46, US gained control over its territory in Oregon, which previously been shared with Britain. The US wins this war, and now they gain huge territories. Essentially, the key thing here is they're surrounding the natives now. The plains natives are in the middle. Before, it was just east and west, and now the Americans surround them. So quite simply, they want to get through the plains. That's a quick route from east to west. So this really changes a lot. So really important, this gaining of territory in the 40s. And then you get the Indian Appropriations Act in 1851. So this provided the government money to pay for moving the Indians in the Indian Territory onto reservations. Again, these were the same ones who've been forced to move from the eastern states. Hunting lands are allocated. Reservations were often far from tribes' sacred places, so it's going to be massively problematic. But this establishes reservations. Remember, this is after the Fort Laramie Treaty, territories, and this is reservations. It was a continuous policy, basically, to get Plains Indians off their land. Okay, so that was just a little bit of the policies. You need to know them. Now we're going to have a look at lawlessness. It's all about mass settlement. Means they're outstripping government control, meaning people have to look after themselves. Gold rush causes this. One of the big consequences was lawlessness. These gold towns had less desirable crowds who come. They basically think, okay, why do we have to do the work? We'll let some poor guy go and mine the gold. When he comes down, we'll just take it from him, right? So quite often this leads to quite aggressive confrontations. Justice basically was the miners. The miners were band together to establish justice. So people basically sort things out themselves. Vigilantism. Right, why was it a problem? Well, distance to cover large areas, poverty, the harsh conditions, so people went to desperate measures. Culture of violence, basically no one's going to protect you, you've got to protect yourself. More men than women, essentially. So in these towns you get prostitutes. One man uses a prostitute, but then of course another man uses a prostitute. Well, they want that woman, so ends up fighting. land and claims and gold, similar to what I said before. So all these problems. What else? Vigilantes, as I said, you need to take matters into your own hands. Groups form together to establish justice. Problem with that was they would sometimes use it to settle a vendetta. Wasn't ideal. Different racism. So Chinese who came from Beijing, so basically came from China to California. They didn't make the migration across from west to east. They from east to west. They landed in the west. They were faced immediately with racist attitudes. Cattle barons basically took matters into their own hands. They basically end up controlling a lot of the juries and the courts that are around because of the money they had, and the poor court system. Judges had poor knowledge of the law. Courts gave unfair verdicts. They could be bribed. Okay, what are the problems? Well, the first settlers in the American West had to be tough to survive. You get the territories, and I'm going to talk about the territories a little bit. The first newly occupied lands on the plains were federal territories and were administered by a governor, 3 judges, and U.S. Marshal. When it becomes 5,000, it becomes a territory. In addition, locally elected sheriffs who could deal with local criminals. New territories were lawless, right? No one to govern them. Miners in the mining towns set up miners' courts, basically to settle matters themselves. In many areas, local citizens set up vigilante groups who dished out their own kind of justice. To become a state, you'd reach 60,000. The territory became a state with its own laws, government, and finances, although there was still a US Marshal present, slowly helped by improved communications. Big problem with mining towns, well, punishment for crimes was often fast and simple. Small crimes, flogging and whip. For serious crimes such as robbery, you might be punished by hanging. Lynchings were common, where the vigilante groups would group together and basically dish out their own form of justice. And, what else? We've got federal law enforcement. So 3 judges would hear court cases, and a marshal would then be appointed when a territory became a state. A marshal could appoint deputies and order any man to join a posse to hunt down the lawbreakers. Sheriffs, when a territory had 5,000 people, you'd get a sheriff. Similar powers to a marshal for their county area. Okay, they were chosen because they could break up fights, calm people down. They're quite tough, these sheriffs. And geography, again, like I said, one sheriff, this huge area, they just can't compete. And when a sheriff can't compete, when a sheriff can't enact the justice, people take it into their own hands. And we've got corruption. Essentially, these law officers weren't paid very much, so they'll take a backhander from criminals to look the other way quite often. The vigilante committees, again, read through that, but they're dishing out their own form of justice and the racist attitudes. Okay, so again, please have a little look. I've tried to keep that short and sharp, but again, read through the material as well. Bye.